Hello, hello, and welcome to Connect In. Connect In is a weekly broadcast about the importance of getting out of your head and back into your heart. When we are back in our head or back in our heart, life goes smoothly. There is more ease. And guess what? There's even more energy available to yourself. So I'm Damini Celebree, the author of Painting the Landscape of Your Soul, and it is my mission to help you live as your brightest, best self so that you can live a deeply happy life. I am a unique mix of energy healing and shamanic healing and intuitive creation. And those potent mixes helps you get to your soul's truth. Because really, our truth is in our body and in our heart. Our soul's truth is not in our head. That's not to say that we push our head off to the side, but what's important is we help our head, our mind, our body, and heart stay in balance, right? Because otherwise, we're just battling ourselves over and over again. So today I'm going to talk about this is part 3. Today I'm going to talk about part 3 of the inner game, the stories we tell ourselves. And so what I'd like to do before we go any further is get out of my head and back into my body and heart. And I invite you to do that with me. You can imagine these things, or you can actually do this along with me. What I like to do is engage my senses as much as possible. So for me, that means I light a little incense. I light a candle. And they are cues that I give my body that I am coming back into the most precious part of me, my heart. So how do you feel now that we did that? Yeah. The quickest way that we can get out of our head and down into our body is bringing our awareness to your breath. So take a quick moment, notice how you feel. Just kind of do a little scan of your body. Then bring your awareness to your breath. Bring that breath down to your belly. Bring that breath into your hips and down into your feet. Wiggle your toes. Yeah. Breath, belly, feet should be your mantra to get you out of your head, especially when your head is freaking out. So, what does a head freak out look like? Anxiety, worry, uh, just crazy thoughts running through your head. And also self doubt, self worth, lack of self worth. Um, all those stories that you tell yourself that keep you from being present with yourself, right? So if you think about this energetically, if you're kind of in your groove, and we've all had this in your groove experience, right? Where you just feel alive, empowered, excited about life, all of those things. And some people say the phrase, you're on fire. And then you're like in your groove, and all of a sudden something goes, and for some reason that you can't comprehend, like you start going down on yourself. You start thinking about, oh, really, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I'm not any good at this, right? It, yeah. So we all have these moments where we are in our groove. We are sovereign with ourselves. We are fully us, as fully as we can be at this moment, right? And then there is the mind that goes, whoa, wait a minute, too much expansion here. Hold on, back up. Let's go to where it's safe. Let's go back to a story that holds you back, right? And the truth is the more that your inner critic is showing up, the more you are at a precipice of change. So I think our inner critic, some people call it our inner demons, our inner perfectionist, blah, 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 all these names, for the thing that keeps us from being our brightest, best self. I believe that when our inner critic, let's start that again, our inner critic shows up at a really young age to keep us safe and protected for whatever reason, it decides to kick in. And the inner critic doesn't have a whole bunch of room for growth and change. And so what do? We tend to push the parts of us that we don't like off to the side. We tuck them in closets. We do all kinds of weird things with them. You know what, mommy loves? That takes a lot of energy to keep those parts of yourself tucked away, right? And so my loving suggestion is to give your inner critic some space for expression, some space for acknowledging, some space to have a voice, right? And I liken the inner critic sometimes as like a dust bunny under the bed. I don't know about you, but I kind of watched The Blob when I was young, and it terrified me. And so I had my parents every night with a big, like massive flashlight, inspect all the nooks and crannies in my house because I perceived that there was a monster under my bed, the blob. What ended up seeing, sometimes it was a tennis ball, sometimes it was a dust bunny, sometimes it was a cat toy, you know, but the mind can make these things incredibly monstrous, right? Demonous. And when we give ourselves the opportunity to express what our inner critic is concerned about, that thing under the bed really does become a dust bunny, a cat toy, etc., etc. And so I like to incorporate the intuitive, creative, and healing processes to get under the story of the head. And that's why I use shamanism and intuitive creation and energy medicine as a combinations of things to get you to your truth, to get you to your soul's truth. Yeah. So I've been talking a lot. Let's come back into breath, to belly, to feet. Feel yourself kind of landing back in your body, right? It's early for some of you. We got caffeine in our system. We're kind of gearing up for the day, which really brings our energy way up into the head. And then sometimes we get beside ourselves or behind ourselves or in front of ourselves. But they're all realms of the mind. When you do this mantra that I invite you to do, breath to belly to feet, you come back into your body, right? And I do believe our body is kind of like the housing of a compass, and the heart is the arrow. So when we come back into our body, we can learn how to navigate life to our fullest expression by simply listening and respecting cues that our body gives us, right? And so we all know about these cues that our inner critic give us, right? For me, it's corn chips. If I'm like driving to the store just for corn chips, I know that I've pushed on something that needs some expression. For you all, it may be something very different. Obviously, if not, there'd be not enough corn chips in the world for all of us, right? But really, what is it that it's important to recognize how your body kind of allows you to go forward and allows you to go, wait, stop, hold on, wait, right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that more in a minute. But what I want to come back to is all about the stories that we tell ourselves. So, a little interim here. Please, if you like what if you like what you're hearing, if it is inspiring you to be your brightest best self, please share. Please like, share, comment, review. Um, it's it is my mission to help you live as your most authentic self and to really live a deeply happy life. That doesn't mean unicorns and fairy tales. That means that you're okay in your skin at this moment. And really, that is really all we can do. Okay, breath to belly to feet. Allow yourself to land back into your beautiful self. Wiggle your toes. Yeah, nice. So let's talk a little bit about the stories we tell ourselves. In the last episode, I talked about the inner critic and the two wolves of the first people story of the two wolves, where one wolf was talking about, excuse me, where one wolf was talking about all the goodness that we are, and the other wolf was yammering on about all the bullshit that we are, you know. And the parable of the story is, which wolf do you feed? Which wolf do you bring your attention to? Right? I think the first step really is to recognize that you got different voices in your head telling you about your goodness and not your goodness. You know, I'm only like a little bit more ahead of you all. Like, I'm not saying I am any kind of expert or group, or I guess I am an expert for to help you transform, but I'm still doing my work, my loves. And so I talk about these things from a deep experience. So I think the first thing that's super important is just to notice that sometimes you're being guided by the beauty of who you are, and sometimes you're being guided by these inner demons, which are often fear based, right? What is it the Course in Miracles talk about? There's only two energies, there's love and there's fear. So there's the good wolf, if you will, that's talking about the goodness of you and the love that you bring into the world, and the bad wolf is like, oh no, you're just blah, 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 blah. And that's fear. But let's dive into a little bit more of these labels of the stories we tell ourselves. Um, you've probably seen these on the socials, in Clubhouse and different podcasts where people focus on these stories. They call it, combating your inner perfectionist, um, getting control of your inner critic, um, dealing with yourself not being worthy. Like, there are all these labels that we really talk about that keep us back, all these stories. So, first, you got to know that you're being waylaid by your mind. Then you need to kind of understand, actually, I don't think it's understanding. You need to recognize that the stories that you're telling yourself are most likely lies, and are most likely lies, and they're based in fear, right? So let's just take a moment for a minute. And if you're listening and you're not driving a car, and you can, I'm going to invite you to grab a piece of paper or your phone, right? And just write in one column all the stories that you tell yourselves, right? You can imagine them as well. And then right next to it, so there'd be like, I am unworthy, right? And the other side of that column would be what? I am worthy, for example. And I'm curious if that kind of triggers you, if it makes you go, oh yeah, or oh, this is so hard, or sometimes I think it's really hard to label the deep stories that waylay us. And that's why in these other podcasts that I'm talking about, we are labeling them, the inner critic, the inner perfectionist. And they all have different forms. So sometimes these stories come from childhood, sometimes they come from ancestors, lineage stories. Sometimes they come from just really bad events that happened when you were young. I guess a simple example is, you burn yourself on the stove, and if you are not educated in the languaging and the kind of physicality of things, you could think fire is bad, right? And so these are just life experience stories. Um, Culturally, there are stories about how men and women, and then everybody in between, should act, look, behave, speak, all of these things, right? There's a whole bunch of cultural stories that keep us from being our most authentic selves. And then there's these ancestor stories that come down the line. I have one in particular, although I don't think my family would label it out loud, but it's something that I perceived that if you are visible, if people notice you, then they can hurt you. Crazy, right? But it's those really deep stories that can help us from flourishing, from really blossoming into who we are. There's political stories of how you should be and how you should act. Um, there are, again, there's so many. There's just so many. So it's helpful for you just to take a few minutes and just write down just a couple stories that pop into your head, right? And if you were in a program or workshop with me, I would have you explore those stories a little bit more by doing some free writing, just noticing whatever comes up in the writing about these stories. And nothing has to be um, grammar or proper, it's more stream of conscious writing. And sometimes that gives your inner critic a little bit more of a voice and expression that can help things move, right? So some of you know that I'm a five-element acupuncturist, and in the classic texts or doctrines of this medicine, there's one thing that always resonates very deeply with me, and that's about the function of the heart. And the function of the heart is to allow all emotions to move through. Just, right? Flow. Aren't we all looking for flow on some level? And when these emotions get stuck, like maybe we get stuck in fear or anger or hate or self-hatred or whatever that is, the energy slows down. And because I'm talking about acupuncture theory, what happens is the energy slows down, not only in the heart, but in the energetic pathways or meridians. That can cause pain, physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, spiritual pain, right? Stuck energy is stuck energy, and pain is in all these different levels. And so if you do some free writing, right, you allow some space for movement, right? That makes sense to you all? So let me give you another story. Um, Quite a while back, I was facilitating a workshop, and in the process, and I've mentioned that I use embodied creativity as the way into the body, into your truth, because it really does override the mind. And so I was watching this woman, and she was happily painting. And, one of the invitations is if a color gets your attention, just go for it and pick it up. And she was holding black in her hand. And I walked up because she was holding black in her hand for a really long time. And she had this super, super tiny paintbrush. And I said, what's going on? She's like, I followed my heart. I got the black paint, but I just can't go any further. And I was like, well, why? And she's like, I'm terrified of black. It's like, okay. And I won't get into the details of other stories that she came up with, but I was like, this is just kids paint and paper, right? This is not going to physically harm you or change you. It's just going to give you an opportunity to step over that little personal block, that personal boundary. I said, so the invitation for her is to get this little tiny paintbrush and put a piece of black on the paper, you know. And going back to that heart concept, that got some flow. Like in that way, like she didn't have a story about the inner critic, right? But what happened is that this whole full body stop happened and she couldn't go further. We all have these experiences in many different ways, but this is just a really great way of thinking about stories, giving them some voice, and then helping yourself move through that perceived barrier, right? So, I saw her put a little line of black and I walked away and I came back later and the whole 4 by 4 foot piece of paper was all black. But what it was is she didn't have to understand all the story. She just had to give herself permission for expression, right? And that was the free writing. So back to this concept of the stories we tell ourselves, it's so important to, one, recognize the stories, right? Recognize when you're getting waylaid by a story. It's also important, I believe, to give yourself some space to do some free writing and just stream of conscious writing about the stories that are coming up because they'll give you little bits of insight, and insights are incredibly helpful, but more importantly, they move our energy. So when we're thinking about the inner game, right, and we're thinking about ways that those stories that hold us back from being our brightest, best self, the first thing I invite you to do is go, whoa, I'm being side railed here. Breath to belly to feet. Just start free writing. I feel this. I am craving corn chips, whatever that is. And just let your body from the deep or subconscious places begin to move the energy, begin to have some form of expression. Yeah. So the stories we tell ourselves don't have to derail us, but we certainly can't keep tucking them into the corners. The invitation is to give them some expression so you can get your life force back, so you can have some energy and begin to live your soul's truth as your brightest, best self. So there are plenty of ways that you can go further on your own with this, but I like to invite you to, one, like, subscribe and share, as always. And I'm super excited to share that I am beginning a private membership community called Explore Your Soulscape. And in that, we will work with the inner game, how to allow creativity to help you express the truth of who you are. There are tons of ways to do this, but I think the best way would be to pop over to DaminiCelebrate.com, join the membership, and also when you join on the mailing list, you will get Your Heart's Yes mini booklet. And in this booklet is a powerful tool to really help navigate your heart's yes and those full body stops. So until next week, any until next week, I will see you, and we're gonna, yep, it's still February, so we're gonna still be working with the inner game next week. So I hope you have a brilliant week. Feel free to share, subscribe, like, comment, and check out DaminiCelebrate.com. There's tons of resources to help you live as your most amazing self.